The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
Welcome to episode 23 of the Florida Podcast News Show on the Florida Podcast Network. Florida Podcasting News keeps you on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
On today's episode, we'll be talking with whom else but one of our favorites, Krimitsos. I mean, goodness, through all of this that's been going on, if there is anybody who can come out of this pandemic and this shakeup of our world, like bigger and better than ever, it's this guy. And he's done something unbelievable for the podcasting industry. And we'll be talking to him all about it on today's show.
Very good. This episode is brought to you by directtowing.app. Thanks for joining us.
This is Jemmy.
And this is Glenn. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Florida Podcasting News Show. Before we get into the guts today, can I do a quick shout out?
We got to talk about someone else's guts.
Yes, that's right. So I
can't help myself.
You're bad. So I got to do, the power of podcasting and the power of the people in podcasting. I want to talk about that first today because I think it's important, especially Florida podcasting, because that applies here.
We're a little family.
Yeah, we are. And I think the Podfest family has extended that Florida family out into the world, really. But yeah, we were very close-knit community here in the Florida podcasting world and have been for years. Probably, I don't know, the Florida Podcast Association started maybe 8-9 years ago. And it's at that time when I went to my first meeting in Tampa many years ago that I met Lee Silverstein. And Lee's been on our show a couple of times. And Lee does the We Have Cancer podcast. And, he knew that I'm going through, and probably this audience doesn't know, but I had a colonoscopy. And by the way, I hope hearing this news today encourages you to get one if you're over 45 years old, which is the new norm now for colonoscopies.
Knocking on that door pretty soon.
Yeah,
Ooh.
I know. And, I highly encourage it because, well, I'll tell you why. So I went and had a colonoscopy, my first one in like 7 years. And they found a couple small polyps, which they always do. They always find a couple small ones. But they also found a very large one. So they couldn't take it out. I have to go for surgery this Thursday to have about 10 to 12 inches of my colon removed. And they'll also check and see if it's spread, the cancer has spread at all. So Lee, of course, knows a lot about this. His cancer journey started with colon cancer. So he has been terrific in this whole thing. And yesterday he called me up and guided me all through what's going to happen this week through the surgery, before and after. But that's the kind of friendships. He didn't have to do that. He's still battling his battle after 9 years. But that's the kind of friendships you develop. And that's the kind of people that podcasters are. Especially
the people in this crowd. My goodness, I'm still blown away. When you told me that today, guess what? I was not surprised. I was not surprised.
Yeah, and especially with the Podfest crowd. And I'm so glad we're having Chris on today because, he's the one that started all of this.
Right.
But it is a community, and it really has developed into a community. I don't know so many people from the other podcasting conferences. We know a ton of people from this one. And I can't tell you how many of those same crowd I've heard of since I made this announcement, or I've heard from, asking how I'm doing, when's the surgery, all of that stuff. So I just wanted to thank Lee. I know he listens to this show. So Lee, you're a good guy and we really appreciate you. And guess what is now on my podcast player? We Have Cancer podcast is now on my podcast player.
There you go. So yeah, Lee is going to be guiding you through this process with his podcast, much like Dave Jackson has guided you through the process of podcasting with his podcast. Now, you famously listened to Dave Jackson's podcast in the shower. So do you care to share with Lee? Yeah, do you care to share with Lee where you're listening to his podcast?
Oh, I'll probably be listening from my hospital bed is where that's probably where I'll be listening, is in my hospital bed. I'm going to have to be in the hospital for 3 to 5 days, so I'll probably be catching up.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, from all of us, I mean, my goodness, we really are a family. And so I can thank you to Lee. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to everyone who's shown you some support, because you're one of my best friends. And so that means a lot to me. So as you start this journey and continue what you're going through, we're, just take it one day at a time. We're all here for you.
One of?
Oh, I'm sorry. Best friend ever, best friends forever. This is my makeup song. Yeah. My bad.
Speaking of the man himself, should we talk to Chris Krimitsos of
let's get him on the
Podfest?
line.
If 2020 has taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected. And as we all get back on the road to normal, there would be nothing worse than being stuck by the roadside due to an empty gas tank or a flat tire. The Direct Towing app is specially designed to help you escape this experience. Our app is easy to navigate, and you can request our services for both local and long-distance towing. All alone in Alligator Alley? Tap on Direct Towing. Tire trouble on the turnpike? Tap on Direct Towing. We provide professional, quality emergency towing services with zero membership fees. And we service all vehicles, ranging from compact cars through larger cars. So next time you and your family are in a roadside bind, rely on the Direct Towing app's 24-hour roadside assistance for emergency towing or gas services, flat tires, accidents, and other unforeseen mishaps. That's the Direct Towing app. Head to directtowing.app for more information. That's directtowing.app.
Well, back with us is one of our best friends in all of Florida podcasting, and that's Chris Krimitsos. And we have to congratulate Chris because he's gotten super techie now and achieved a world record because of it.
It's amazing.
Yes.
Congratulations, Chris.
Thank you. Glenn, I'm glad you're mentioning that super techie. We didn't know how to use Zoom webinar before we started this. We figured it out on day one, and then we learned each and every day. It's kind of funny.
I know that because I was there with you.
So funny.
That's
right. You were on the first day.
Yeah.
We had to figure everything out.
What officially is the record?
sorry,
What's the title now of your record?
So the title is Largest Virtual Podcasting Event over a week's time. We set the record at 5,003. So we literally made it by 3 people. So if 3 people no-showed, we would not, basically 3 or 4 people no-showed, we would not have hit the record.
Wow.
That tells you right there. Do everything, people. Every email counts. Every social media post counts. Everything counts. Everything counts. That's amazing. By 3. Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, in the Guinness World Record, Glenn, the adjudicators, so basically they have a team of adjudicators. They had to set the record. We thought it was going to be easy to accomplish until we got into it, and we really realized how hard that was. in
a lot of rules and things, right?
Yeah, well, not only that, it was in August, so part of it was like parents were worried about their kids going back to school, and there's just there's been a lot of things this whole year, so people paying attention to different things. So at that time, we thought it was going to be, people would be all excited, but people had Zoom burnout, or online burnout by that time. But we were able to really rally the base and get people excited and create things no one's seen before. So it was a lot of fun to get it by 3.
This pandemic, people have had to, no matter what industry they're in, no matter what they do for a living, no matter what they do for life, for joy, for anything, the goal has been, okay, what do we do now? How do we figure this out now? How do we adjust? And people have been adjusting in some big ways, but nobody else is going for a freaking Guinness World Record. Like, talk about a huge push towards, I'm just going to make like the best lemonade I can out of these lemons. Like, where did this idea even first come up?
Well, our mutual friend Gabe Aloisi, after we did a 1-day summit just to test. And it was in May. 874 or 5 people showed up for that. It was a 1-day. It wasn't even live. It was a pre-recorded summit, but we would launch the pre-recordings live on that day. And I got kind of cocky, like, wow, we could probably get 2,000 people if we really tried. And Gabe was like, well, you always talk big. Why don't you go for a Guinness World Record? I'm like, well, that's kind of ballsy. I don't know if I do that. He goes, well, he used my own words. He goes, what's stopping you? I go, okay, good point. Let me call them up. So I sent them an email, and as it turns out, they're transitioning their model because there's no physical events. And they're like, yeah, we're definitely interested in a virtual record in the podcast space. Let's talk to our adjudicators. They always talk about like the rules committee. And then they said, we'd be interested if you're interested. And then we co-created it. And then, I don't know, Glenn, I probably told the 2 of you about it, but I held it back because I was nervous. So by the time I pulled the trigger, we only had 5 weeks to not only get all the speakers on board, but to promote. It was an insane, over 330 presenters, 2 weeks, a pre-week and a main week. It was amazing. And we were able to make it. I don't think I don't want to say this like, I don't think if we did it 2 weeks later, we would have hit it, because by then kids started going into school and it created a lot of calamity for parents. And I'm a parent, and I know, Jemmy, you are. Like, I could see it would have been a lot tougher to hit it 2 weeks later. So we kind of, we did it. We knew we had to rush to do it while people were still home, so they had something to look forward to. And we're very grateful that our community showed up and supported it.
So just tell us a little bit more about what that event was, like what was covered, because we really want to encourage people to make sure that, especially in this space, like you have to follow Podfest and you, Chris, and everything that's going on so they don't miss big, cool things like this. So what was actually covered? Because it wasn't just about hitting the world record. It was actually also about giving out really awesome information for making a really cool event.
So we basically looked at the iTunes categories and created what we call microcons, but sub-conferences for as many different categories as we could find that leaders would step up into. So we had 3 different languages spoken. We had Lily Wong doing one in Mandarin. We had 3 Spanish tracks speaking, and we had a voiceover track. We had a fitness track. We had a She Podcast. They did an event. We had an editor track. We had a startup track, a tech track. So it was like anything you could imagine for the beginner and also for the 201 podcaster, audience growth. We had all kinds of tracks. Geolocal, Glenn's favorite, like Geolocal, which is big. That was actually, Glenn, number 3 ranked track. People liked that. That was one of the most, when the Hoover stats came back, we were surprised to see that. So a lot of people looking at that now. But Glenn's been talking about it for like 5 years. Now people are catching up. So it's been really interesting to see. We also had a sex communicator track for people that talk about
I missed that
sex
one.
and relationships. That was actually really interesting. And then
how did I miss that? I should have got a special invitation. Jeez.
Sean Lee led that, and then we had a FaithCon Spark.
They were at the same time.
They were separated. Yeah, that would be funny if they were running. We had Black podcasters.
Wait a minute. Did you do the sex track first and then everybody transitioned into the religious track? Is that how it worked?
No. What a lead-in. No, it was we separated by a few days. But
was there absolution and confession in between?
we had a comedy track in between.
Yeah.
There you go.
But that sex track, it's a big space right now in the podcasting world.
Well, people think about they forget, but like sex communication track, that covers a lot, like relationships, couples, all kinds of stuff. So it was really interesting. It was interesting. You guys will appreciate this. No one's ever given them a platform. So they were like, holy crap, you're actually going to give us the floor and we could talk about how to help our because we're helping our peers, our fellow communicators. So I know people giggle and laugh about the topic, but it was about helping other communicators. And it was amazing to see how many people were like, oh my God, thank you for not putting us in the basement and giving us a platform. The other one was, there's a lot of puns there.
Yeah, I was going to
laughing. Yeah.
Did you notice how quiet I got?
As I said it, I was like, well, that was not the best. Depending how you look at it. The other one was, what was the other one we did? Audio drama. So audio drama is that's always put on a really big track. People don't realize how big audio dramas are. And I've talked to a lot of the audio drama creators, and the two of you will appreciate it. They always say, thank you for putting us on even footing with the other podcasters. And I guess I didn't realize this, but a lot of other conferences have not given them even footing. And we were the first 3-4 years ago. And that's a big deal for them that we were able to give them their equal billing, because they have probably some of the largest audiences of all podcasters.
It's one of the hardest kind of podcasting to do, with the kind of planning and prep that kind of takes. And
absolutely.
It's totally a different ballgame. So that's great. So with everything that's going on right now, my goodness, people are trying to figure it out. And I know you've been on top of all the conversations in the industry the last few months. Aside from going for a Guinness World Record, what other really cool things have you seen that, you might be able to put out there as ideas for other podcasters to consider doing in this kind of new era of life right now?
So what I would tell people is podcasting is exploding in that Amazon, we're seeing a lot of downloads coming from Amazon. We talked to Rob Walsh. We just did a masterclass where he mentioned that they're seeing Amazon stats popping up on people's metrics. So that's very unusual for it to happen that quick. But obviously Amazon has a ginormous reach. But people are utilizing certain shows and listening via Amazon. So people are seeing a lot of growth there. So right now is a really great time to get involved. And Spotify, love them or hate them, they're growing. Like their download numbers, that people are starting to see a lot of Spotify numbers coming online. So what I would actually tell a podcaster is if you have a message, think about the strategy, and that there's so many different ways to go about the strategy. But if you have a good product, invest in marketing your podcast. So if you can invest some dollars to buy some subscribers, and what I mean by that is advertise on some of these players, it could help you get a leg up. And right now it's fairly economical to get subscribers through these players. So I'm talking about the podcast players. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is Jemmy and Glenn and myself, we started a while back when things were different. Now it's very competitive. So if you can invest a couple of dollars to stand out, I think it's a worthy investment if you're looking to really build a large show quickly. If you're doing it as a hobby, just enjoy the hobby, get to know all the things that are out there and have fun with it. But if you're looking to grow, I would utilize it like a business and put some money behind it.
That's a good point. Things have changed a lot since we all started. And some of it's been good and some of it, I'm not sure yet. We'll see. Time's going to tell, like with anything else. For me, in particular, I never had competition in the horse world, podcast-wise, until about 2 years ago. And now there's a bunch of them. Now everybody has them. Now, some have come and gone already. They're still out there trying. So for me, it's actually been a good thing because the more people, they're teaching people how to listen to podcasts in the horse world. So they're bringing a lot of new people in, and then they search and find my shows. So I know I've talked to a lot of people who found my shows because they listened to one of the others. And we never had that help in the first 10 years we were doing this. So in a way, competition's a good thing depending on your niche.
Yeah, well, you're like the Goliath in your niche. You've been there for how many years, thousands of shows. So it's going to help grow your show. For someone just starting out, though, they got to figure out how to stand out.
Yeah, and that's got to be hard right now.
It's difficult. And we're talking about from the perspective of growing a sustainable base, right? Someone's doing it as a hobby, have fun with it. Like, don't take this to heart. Like, improve and get better. But Katie's meditation podcast, for instance, it's ginormous at this point. It's going to be very tough to compete with what she's built because she had Biz Women Rock prior to it, and she's also investing in ad money and growing it. So it really depends on what niche you're going after. And if you could, I would say, Glenn, if someone could, like, if I could pay to be in your network and be part of your network, I mean, it saves you so much trouble than actually trying to start something from scratch. Now is when I think other people need to partner up with more seasoned podcasters if they're looking for a decent sized audience right out the gate. Don't get me wrong. There's tons of niches still waiting to be had that no one's even done a show on. That's still out there, but those are in the niches. If we're talking about general business shows, you're almost better off figuring out how to work with someone that's established where they could shed some of their downloads off to you and maybe create some kind of joint venture if you want to grow quickly. Coming into our own, that being said, Rob Walsh shared this stat of the 1.4 million podcasters, and don't quote me, I'm off by like 10 or 20,000, but I'm close. There's 1.4 million podcasters. Of those, the people that have published shows in the last 90 days is 339,000. And he likened that to bloggers. We're still at a 1 to 2,000 ratio, 2,500 ratio per blogger for active podcasters when you look at active. And I think podcasting requires a lot of work in TLC. And that's why we see a lot of people start and stop and they never go back. They realize it takes work and you got to show up each and every week or each and every month.
Or each and every day in my case.
Right. So there is that is a competitive advantage because most people aren't willing to do that.
It's a lot. Jemmy and I have been saying that since the beginning. Everybody we talk to, and I know everybody that she consults with over at Flintstone Media, we tell them the same thing. This is more work than you ever think it's going to be if you want to do it and succeed. If you're just doing it for fun and want to put as much effort into it as you want to, that's great. But if you want to succeed, if you maybe want to someday make some money on it, it's going to take more than you think. Chris, I'll remember, and probably Jemmy was there. I remember one of the talks I did at Podfest years ago, somebody asked me how many hours it takes for pre and post production for every hour on the air. And I said 10 to 12, and the audience laughed. And then I had to point out it is 10 to 12 if you consider marketing and everything you have to do for that podcast, booking your guests and everything else. It's 10 to 12. And nobody's laughing at that anymore.
Well, and you have a team too, so you got to allocate everybody's time involved in it, right? So
it's still 10 to 12. If you want to do it successfully and you consider marketing and everything else you do for your podcast, you have to include that all in there. For every hour you're in the air, it's 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah, my wife Katie puts at least 35 hours a week.
There you go.
So like, yeah, when you say it, right, because she's always, if she's not creating the podcast, she's marketing it.
Well, people
or
don't
she's
look
doing
at
something
that.
around that, or dealing with advertisers, because that also takes time.
People
you got to
don't look at
negotiate
that.
and talk to your advertisers. Yeah.
Has that changed, Jemmy? Is it still the same? Oops, I think we lost her.
Jemmy.
Oh no, Jordan smashed his fingers. Please finish with Chris. Text me when you're done.
Oh, poor Jemmy.
Okay. Well, it looks like Jemmy got called away here real quick, Chris, and we'll wrap up. I don't know what's happening at the Jemmy household, but it's been great talking to you again. It's been fun. It's been a little while. When is Podfest next year? Is there a physical date set?
Yes, June 9th through the 13th. We're going to put down the exact dates within that range, but it's somewhere. We have the hotel for those dates, and then we'll figure out exactly when everything's happening. 2021. We've done quite a few virtual events. We're done with the podcasting virtual events for this year. And then we're excited about seeing everybody in person. I think it'll be the sweetest reunion, because you know this, Glenn, we're the only group that could say we were hanging out, hugging each other before the cliff dropped. And so we all had the weird experience of going from the high of highs to literally life comes to a halt. And I know you were watching things. Yeah, you and I were watching. Literally, it was the next day, because you remember the cruise ships were on 24/7, and no one left their home. Let's be honest. Next week was when it was official, but that very next day on Monday, I don't think anyone was leaving their home, because they were just showing cruise ships stranded and passengers everywhere.
We were literally the last conference in Orlando, I think. We
were, because everything around us was canceling after us as well, and
we all got lucky. We got very lucky. We got to see each other. No one got sick. And now I'm hoping to be the first conference back next year, which I think we will be it. But I'm curious to see how emotional everybody will be, like, seeing each other, because it was like the last group of people we all saw was each other, and then we'll be the first group to see each other. It's going to be a unique thing to watch that happen. Yeah, and I think we should have a vaccine by then. It was smart to push it back. Usually it's in March. It was smart to push it back. I think
we got very lucky, Glenn. The hotel was supposed to have their contracts ready prior to, but because of the coronavirus thing, it was messing up their systems, so they could never get us a contract in time. So we literally got lucky. Otherwise, who knows, I'd be waiting to change the dates. So we were able to fluidly change the dates. So we're very fortunate that mid-June, like you said, will more than likely be ready to rock. And I think we're going to have a lot of people joining us to hang out with us. So I'm excited about that.
Imagine what this has done to the conference industry around the country.
Listen, you know this. We got the first lucky break for Podfest thanks to Neil's sister at that big, beautiful resort. That resort doesn't exist anymore. Like,
really?
They had to lay off everybody. So if you think of it from that perspective, it's like, and they're running these big, massive hotels with like 2 or 3 people. So service isn't that great, because they're trying their best to do what they can do. But those hotels are like cruise ships. You need like a full staff for everything.
Well, and you need to have 2 or 3 conferences going at once. I mean, it needs to be
correct for it to be profitable. That is correct. Right. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to have amazing people like yourself in our community. I'm very grateful that people support us for Podfest Global, which kept the lights on for the Krimitsos household and kept things going and the momentum going. But, it's been a crazy year, and I think you just got to do the best you can and then support one another. I think that's what we should always be doing, but I think COVID really put that at the forefront.
Very good. Thanks, Chris. What's the website?
All right, brother. Podfestexpo.com.
Hello there, fellow Florida travel fans. We now have an official Patreon. In case you're unfamiliar, Patreon is a great way for community to support the creators of the content you love, like us, podcasters.
If you're enjoying the content we bring you on this show or any of the shows on the Florida Podcast Network, you can help ensure that content keeps coming through a small monthly donation. For just what it would cost you to get a cup of coffee, at Starbucks like you used to, you can make a real difference by helping us chip away at our production costs.
So if today's episode brought some sunshine, entertainment, and information to brighten your day, please help to see that these episodes keep coming by becoming a patron. Head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network to support the show. And it comes with some sweet benefits.
You want access to bonus extras, nostalgic for those old school radio shout-outs, lover of good quality merchandise? Well, not only will your monthly contribution help us grow the show, but you'll get some cool stuff too.
So please head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network for further details and to become a patron. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network.
You can also find the link right here in the show notes or by visiting Florida Podcast Network's website. And thanks in advance for not only being part of our listening community, but also for your continued support.
Well, I'm back. Look at that. I returned.
Is everything okay? I'll smash fingers and all.
My son, Ice Max, he is back at virtual school. Things are rocking and rolling. We're back. So thank you so much to Chris for joining us, and then mostly you, and then me again on this show. It was really great. As he mentioned, we want to make sure to highlight to definitely submit your podcast to Amazon. If you haven't done it yet, get your podcast onto that platform. It's a really, really great way to get your show more exposure. So we'll include a link to all of that in the show notes to make sure that you do that. And you're going to be able to find more updates and all of this and anything else that we've mentioned with details, links, and all that stuff in the show notes. So be sure you check that out. Go to floridapodcastingnews.com. And also, we love your feedback. So we would love to hear what you've been up to these last few months in quarantine, coming through all this. So you can let us know by joining our Facebook group. It's called FPN Insiders, or by sending us an email. You can email me, JAIME at floridapodcastnetwork.com, or you can send one to Glenn, GLENN at floridapodcastnetwork.com. He'll have plenty of time while laying up in that hospital bed to read through plenty of emails, so you can email him, or you can find us on social media. We're all over the place at FL Podcast Net.
And many thanks to this week's sponsor, directtowing.app. And be sure to visit all the great shows on the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. Until the next time, thank you for hanging out on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
Now you go clean up your insides, Glenn.
I'm gonna
clean it out.
Yeah, speaking of insides, I'm going to have less of them by next time.
What's one way to lose weight? That's for sure. Bye, Glenn.
Bye.